happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And I'm 64 now. I know I look older, but you tried being gay all these years. It's tough. All right, in the news.
No, before we get to the news.
Okay.
Be quiet, old man. I can say that because I'm older than he is. We want to say thank you and farewell to station WYBE in Philadelphia, which has carried us for many years. They're an independent public station. They're going off the air. They have been just terrific to us for all this time, and we really appreciate everything they've done to reach a very wide and loyal audience in Philadelphia.
We love you there.
We do. And we are scrambling happily and successfully to find a new broadcast home in Philadelphia. We have this almost finally nailed down. We're not going to give you the details yet because we want to make sure everything is absolutely firm before we do.
So how can you know the details? It would help if you got on our email list by going to our website at gayusatv.org, and there's a click there. You can sign up for our email list. You'll get something asking you to confirm you want to be on the list, and then you'll get weekly emails previewing the program.
One email a week.
One a week, unless there's an emergency or something. Very rare. So do that, get on the list, and you'll know. And we'll find also a way to post it on the website as well, won't we? We have a place on our website.
If only we were that adept.
No.
We'll try.
We have a place on our website where we post how everybody can see the program everywhere in the country, all the different ways. And of course, if we do skip a week and miss a program, you can always go to the website and actually watch the program or listen to the audio podcast. So it's always up there. And we post it on Facebook as well. Friend us.
But we expect we will be on the air in Philadelphia, perhaps continuously, next week right away. Also, Saturday night at 7 o'clock, we're arranging that with our new outlet. But we'll keep you informed. Oh, hey, we're hot.
Ann did all this great work. We thank you.
Well, it takes a village.
Okay.
On to the news.
In the news, the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, testified before the Senate. And he says he's not sure if federal employees have to serve LGBT people or not. He's just not sure. He'll get back to them.
I would bang my head against the table, but just assume I did. Meanwhile, Trump's favorite anti-LGBT pastor is condemning Catholics and Mormons, but Trump's just fine with that.
A Catholic bishop has forbidden any acknowledgement of a gay spouse at a funeral for a gay married person.
It's quite a list of stories this week. Some progress in North Carolina, but not nearly enough.
We have 3 encouraging stories from Maine. And don't forget, as Maine goes, so goes the nation.
But more bad news from Tanzania and really awful news from Chechnya.
This should have been earlier, but a Georgia state legislator, because it's not Georgia the country, a Georgia state legislator has called for quarantine for people with HIV.
And wait till you hear who she is. Sam Smith, the very popular singer who did the big hit song Stay With Me a few years ago, now says, I'm as much woman as I am man.
And I'm going to review the revival of Torch Song, which is what they've condensed Torch Song trilogy into, and a new show on life with cerebral palsy, which, if you don't have time to wait till the end of the show, was terrific.
And we have a surprise guest at the end of the show. It's a surprise because she doesn't know she's being cast. But she's just arrived, so we're filling her in on that.
So fix your makeup and hair.
Producer-director of the Audience Award-winning Best Documentary at Newfest, the LGBT Film Festival, for her documentary Hot to Trot about same-sex ballroom dancing competition. So we're going to slip her in here at the end. But let's start, as we always do, with the Trump administration.
Well, shall we start with some of the political tumult in the country? You know, all these senators coming out and breaking with Trump and then saying, and I'm never going to run again.
Well, they can't run again because they would lose, because Steve Bannon is manipulating the Republican primaries in favor of Trump and wacko candidates so that these supposedly establishment Republicans cannot win a Republican primary anymore.
And their basic sin is a break on style. They're saying Trump is ill-mannered. They vote for all of his policies.
Well, and they're going to keep voting for it no matter how much they've criticized him, because they still support these policies. But style, you know, the people who sit around and say, oh, this is so terrible, these people that they're putting up, and these, you know, wonderful establishment Republicans are having to retire. You don't get it. The people who have put Trump in office, who are supporting Bannon, who are supporting these candidates, want to overthrow the status quo. And they are not open to arguments that we should be supporting the status quo.
But the status quo is more for them in the culture. They want to be able to say whatever they want about blacks, gays, and women, basically.
Yes.
And that's what Trump does.
Yes.
And that's what his followers do. So that's what they want. But I mean, these same people are going to be totally screwed over by the policies that this Republican Congress and this Republican president are passing. Totally screwed over.
Well,
I mean, come on.
The beauty of the balance at the moment is that none of that stuff is getting passed because of the paralysis. So Trump is not having to pay the price for passing those policies. He's able to keep these balls in the air. It's quite a genius juggling act of being able to blame the establishment and rev up the base while not actually getting anything done that would then alienate the base.
But the hatchet that he's taken to the Affordable Care Act with executive orders and I'm going to find out on November 1st what those rates are going to look like this coming year, and we're expecting an explosion in rates.
Well, we'll see if that has an effect.
And then, but something like what they did this week in terms of you have to say they are protecting the banks in this country. That was their big move this week, and they needed Mike Pence's vote to vote for it, and they passed it, protecting banks from class action lawsuits.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, so if we have another financial collapse, folks, you know, it's going to hurt everybody, especially the people on the bottom, but everybody, and that's what they're heading towards with all this deregulation.
Yeah. All right. Well, meanwhile, Attorney General Jeff Sessions had to show up at a Senate committee hearing because they have an oversight function. And he's required to show up there, I guess, annually?
I don't know.
I don't know. Periodically to answer questions from the Judiciary Committee about what he's doing at the Justice Department.
So Dick Durbin, a Democratic senator from Illinois, says to him, well, could a social, because we've told you about all these guidances that the Justice Department has said, saying that basically people have all this kind of religious freedom to discriminate, and that gays and lesbians aren't covered, and transgender, et cetera. All right, so Durbin says, could a Social Security Administration employee refuse to assist or accept or process spousal or survivor benefits paperwork for a surviving same-sex spouse?
Has he been watching Gay USA?
So Sessions paused, groaned, and then said, well, that's something I never thought would arise. But I would have to give you a written answer, if you don't mind. I mean,
liar.
Stunning, but it's stunning to sit there and say, yeah, maybe the Social Security Administration could discriminate against these people. Obviously it's going to be a situation where people in the office are going to say, I'm not touching this. You take care of this. Give it to Joe. I think he's gay. Whatever.
He's a big liar.
Could a federal contractor refuse to provide services to LGBTQ people, including in emergencies? Again, Sessions demurred, saying he'd need to look into that in an emergency.
What do you think these religious freedom guidelines are all about? They're about the license to discriminate. And we've only been saying that from a million voices for the last year. And yet he hasn't thought about it.
Well, then I should
Nonsense.
A lot of this is going to be settled, we hope, by the Supreme Court to our favor. The Masterpiece Bake Shop case where the baker says he doesn't. Cake shop? Okay.
Yep.
Cake shop cake. Masterpiece Cake Shop. He doesn't want to create a cake under the First Amendment for a same-sex wedding. So that's going before the Supreme Court in December. So the ACLU wants you to write your congressperson and say, get on the amicus brief, the friend of the court brief, on this. So and this is something everybody in the country can do. You don't even have to go to the ACLU website, but you could, aclu.org. And there'll be a direct link in our email to how you can write your Congress member. But just contact your Congress member and say, I want you to get on the friend of the court brief for this, because this will end civil rights laws as we know them. I mean, not just for gay people, but for everyone. You
could probably write a personal letter to Anthony Kennedy, too, since he's likely to be the swing vote on this. Unless you think that our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is so naive about these issues and really hasn't given any consideration to things like destroying civil rights laws and sanctioning discrimination, he will be addressing the Heritage Foundation this week, just as the president did last week. They know what they're doing, and Paul Weyrich, Tony Perkins, all these people are just sitting there whispering in their ear all day long. They know exactly what all of this is about.
And we have a handful of Republicans who are sponsors of federal LGBT rights legislation who vote for it, including John McCain. But they're all voting for these judges who are going to are committed openly to taking away our rights.
Sure.
I mean, who have vicious anti-gay records, et cetera.
Well, let's start writing to Jeff Flake and Bob Corker and John McCain and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. They could turn the tide on that. And let's do demonstrations at their offices and ask for meetings and whatever. And say, if you're serious about objecting to this kind of discourse from the president and these kinds of actions, then put your money where your mouth is, and especially if you're not going to be in office after the end of next year.
And, some people are saying, God, I just can't stand another day of Trump. I'll take Pence. We've talked about this a lot on the show, but they dug up something Pence wrote in the 1990s. Here's a quote from him. Homosexuals are not as a group able-bodied. They are known to carry.
Well, we are getting a little old, but we're pretty able-bodied.
They are known to carry extremely high rates of disease brought on because of the nature of their sexual practices and the promiscuity, which is the hallmark of their lifestyle.
No. Now, that was 20 years ago. I'd like to think he's learned, but he's shown no evidence of it.
No.
When has he ever done anything that was friendly to gay people?
Well, and then there is Trump's favorite pastor. You've seen this guy, Robert Jeffress. He's at all the meetings with the evangelicals, but Trump really loves him. He tweeted about his great book just out, A Place Called Heaven. A wonderful man. Well, the thing is, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about this week. Jeffress has all these statements about Mormons and Catholics being cult-like pagan religions. This is how Satan gets a hold of society through these cults, Catholicism and Mormonism.
This is a traditional attitude from evangelicals.
That look like real religions, but are not. So she gets asked about this, and she says, I'm not aware of anything he said about that, or blah, 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 blah.
Parenthetically.
But Catholics voted for Trump apparently by a 52 to 45 margin, and white Catholics 60 to 37. I was kind of surprised about that. Yeah. But where is the Catholic outrage? Because you remember Jeremiah Wright with President Obama. Mm-hmm. He said, "Goddamn America," and Obama had to separate himself from him. Even though these days, we're looking at what the country does, it's not a bad quote.
Surely you're not surprised by a double standard.
Well, surprised, but I mean, we have to keep pressing, as reporters did in the press room this week, and say, what the hell's up with this?
They're getting there. And in tangential Trump administration news, you may remember our former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tom Price, who had to resign recently because of all his trips on private aircraft, billed at exorbitant rates to us.
He was doing a great job of destroying the Affordable Care Act, but okay.
Well, this
And
is a
Medicare.
man who, when he was in Congress, voted for bills that helped the pharmaceutical industry that he had invested in.
Yes.
To make himself some money. But that didn't stop him from becoming Secretary of HHS. But now he's out because of the private plane trips. Meanwhile, his wife, as it turns out, is a state representative in Georgia from the Decatur area.
We hadn't heard of her.
No, we hadn't. But she is a doctor, Betty Price. And she came up with a new idea at a hearing, which was that she thought it would probably be a good idea to quarantine people with HIV and AIDS. Because the problem is that this is a direct quote, used to die more readily.
Yes, she said it's almost frightening the number of people who are living that are carriers and the potential to spread. Whereas in the past, they died more readily, and at that point, they're not posing a risk. Oh, interesting. So we've got a huge population that's putting us all at risk, and she used the word quarantine.
Yes, she did.
So, and Elton John personally, of the Elton John Foundation, was very upset about this.
As are we all. So this is just the Trump orbit.
Yes. Well, and new to the Trump orbit is Callista Gingrich, because she's your new ambassador to the Holy See, the Vatican. Now, you may remember she had a 6-year affair with Newt Gingrich while he was on his second wife already. She used to work for Steve Gunderson, the out-gay Republican.
Probably before he was out.
Maybe not. That's how Newt met her when she was an aide to Steve Gunderson. Anyway, now we will remember that the Vatican rejected the ambassador from France
because he was gay.
Yes, they just wouldn't accept his credentials.
Right.
So we'll see if they accept this harlot.
I think they should. I think it would be very entertaining to have Callista at the Vatican. Meanwhile, from the State Department, which may not exist much longer, the Human Rights Campaign has filed a Freedom of Information Act request to to find out if the State Department actually sent a letter to Russia complaining about the violence against gay men in Chechnya, as they claim they did, because they've refused to release such a letter. Why they would refuse to release it is a mystery. So HRC has filed a FOIA request.
And we'll talk more about that on international news.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the State Department spokeswoman, on a completely other note, stood up last week on Spirit Day at the daily press conference and said, my colleagues and I are wearing purple in honor of Spirit Day.
Yes, and Melania did her whole thing against bullying while her husband's on tweets every day bullying the whole world.
Escorted by Betsy DeVos,
Yes.
who has eliminated every guideline to support LGBT students, disabled students,
I will be down
guidelines?
at the New York City Hall on Monday covering a hearing on bullying because of the Abel Cedeno case. The kid in the Bronx was bullied who ended up killing a classmate while defending himself. So anyway, I'll be there and have a report for you next week.
All right.
And the other thing, one of the most appalling stories this week has to be, this anti-abortion guy in the Trump administration going after this person in a detention center.
Teenager.
Is 17 years old, trying to force her to have this baby. And finally, an appeals court has said, no, you got to let her have an abortion, but they're still fighting it.
Because they're doing a stall. They're trying to drag this out until it's too late for her to have an abortion.
After 20 weeks, she can't in Texas.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, 11 trans women from Central America who came here seeking asylum and were put into detention have been released pending hearings. 4 gay men who were with them are still being detained.
The tide has turned at the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Really?
Yes, they have, because of the things coming out of the Justice Department and all this kind of stuff, they are ending their 3-year investigation into the removal of a transgender professor at John F. Kennedy University. And now the professor is having to go through a private right of action in the courts and try to protect their rights while the courts are still protecting rights.
So the Trump administration has officially taken over the EEOC, and that is no longer a way for us to get recourse.
It seems to be. I can't say that for 100% sure, but they did drop this case
Okay, should we go to Maine for a little better news?
Yeah, we can. We can go to Maine. Sure. Let's go to Maine.
Well, the first piece of good news is an old foe of ours, Michael Heath, who ran the Christian Civic League there for years and was our great nemesis trying to stop all anti-discrimination laws or repeal them. Well, he's been making another effort to repeal the sexual orientation non-discrimination law in Maine, but he has failed to collect enough signatures to get it on the ballot.
Never mind.
Yeah.
That's good. And here's another good story from Maine. So there was a high school varsity football coach. This is Gray New Gloucester coach, Dwayne Greeton. And he told his players to taunt the son of a kid known to have two moms on the other side and just keep saying, "Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy?"
Oh
he tells the kids to do this. The kids won't do it. They turn him in. And you're fired. That's what happened.
Fantastic.
The kids stepped up.
There is hope in the younger generation. And similarly, in York, Maine, high school students there had a rally for a student who was being bullied. There they are out in the streets rallying for this poor kid who was being bullied. The school was silent when asked to protect the kid, so the students took it upon themselves to go out and support the kid who was being bullied.
I mean, you know, the Tyler Clementi Foundation works on this. They just hired a new executive director. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but he said he was bullied almost every day of his school life. Mm-hmm. I mean, I read it. I'm reading these stories constantly. This is endemic in humanity, apparently.
Oh, God, yes.
And but there are ways to combat it, and we have to work on them because kids are just terrified. They're dying. They're committing suicide. It's hurting their grades. Stop it. But the way to stop it, of course, is for cohorts of people within the school to not stand for it and to stop the bullies. Mm-hmm. All right.
Let me go to Pennsylvania. A couple of things going on there. You know how the Trump administration let the child health insurance program die, and they're debating whether to renew it. Meanwhile, the states, one by one, are renewing it themselves. So Pennsylvania is debating this and about to vote to renew it. But meanwhile, one of their legislators slipped in an amendment to the bill forbidding any money to be spent to help trans kids.
The kids who need it the most.
Counseling, medication, doctor's visits,
and it passed,
surgery.
Apparently.
Did it?
Well, at a
it passed
level.
Out of committee.
Right, that's right.
Now we'll see whether the full legislature will pass it that way.
Pennsylvania, despite having some cities that have a lot of good stuff going on, is not a state that's ever been able to pass a statewide LGBT rights bill.
Not yet. And an appeals court in Pennsylvania...
The governor wants to pass it.
Yes. An appeals court in Pennsylvania says a trans woman must get a hearing on her request for a name change. A local Philadelphia court said that she had to wait longer because she had a fraud conviction in her background. She had been convicted, she served her time, she was out. Now, anyone else in that situation, any non-trans person, is perfectly entitled to do a name change without question.
Sure.
But this court said to this trans woman, no, you have to wait longer. So the appeals court says, that's unequal treatment. It has to go back for an actual hearing. We'll see whether the lower court sees the light.
By the way, speaking of bullying, Utah has a Republican lieutenant governor, Spencer Cox, who has taken a softer tone on LGBT rights. I'm not saying he's great on all our issues. And he says he has compassion for the underdog because in school, he felt like committing suicide after his parents divorced, and he felt like an out-of-place nerd with big glasses in the school and was bullied all the time.
Look, we all feel like that one way or another.
So he may run for governor in 3 years, and maybe the Bannon people can't do that. And good news from Michigan, Kid Rock is not running for the U.S. Senate.
Yes, excellent news.
He was a guest on Howard Stern, and he said, F no, I ain't running for Senate. He said, like, who the F couldn't figure that out? I'm going on tour.
Phew.
Then he said, the New York Times, they're a little gay, don't you think? He said,
I think they're a lot gay.
They have a narrative of a left-wing agenda.
Oh, well, I don't know that I would equate the two.
I also wouldn't agree with it, left-wing.
And just a side note, we told you last week that the first out gay justice of the New York Court of Appeals was being sworn in, Paul Fineman. I read his speech. It was very eloquent and very moving. He talked about how the LGBT community and LGBT judges had forged a path for him, and that his appointment to the court would not have been possible without everyone who had gone before and fought so hard.
I remember the first gay judge, Dick Fala.
And he said, I understand I have an obligation for those who come after me.
Yes.
And that was very good to hear.
So we'll be watching your record. Give us something we can be proud of. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're looking for a possible consent decree in North Carolina on the ACLU's lawsuit
yes.
against HB 142, the successor to HB 2. They've been fighting over transgender access to bathrooms there and over the law's bar on local cities and towns passing non-discrimination laws that include sexual orientation or gender identity.
The decree says that under current state law, transgender people are not prevented from using their preferred public facilities, although we have a case of a 6-year-old trans girl banned not just from using, the restroom that she wants to use, but from hugging her fellow students.
She switched schools, so her situation is better now. But yes, this stuff is going to continue to happen. And even the proposed consent decree still does not allow for local non-discrimination laws. The governor has signed an executive order that is a non-discrimination on gender identity and expression for state agencies and contractors. But as we've seen with the Trump administration, these executive orders are, ephemeral at best.
I'm surprised the legislature hasn't taken away from him.
Maybe they just haven't gotten to it yet.
Governor Moore is a Democrat, and I'm sorry, what did I say? We'll talk about him later. Yeah. But Governor Roy Cooper, narrowly won a victory there in North Carolina, which was a rebuke to all these bigots, but they maintained a veto-proof majority in the legislature. And what they're busy doing now is changing the courts to suit in their image so that they can control all that as well. Yes,
well, they're diminishing the number of people on the courts so that he can't appoint new, more progressive judges. In Montana, the ACLU and some trans clients are suing to stop a ballot vote, a referendum on one of these anti-trans bathroom laws.
So a transgender woman was trying to get into Busch Gardens, the theme park there.
In Virginia.
In Williamsburg, Virginia. And the guard looks her up and down and says, you can't come in here because you're wearing a costume, a skirt. A costume.
A long skirt, by the way.
This went on for a while. They went back and forth. They talked to authorities there and all, because finally the couple had to
It's her and her girlfriend.
Yes, a girlfriend. They switched clothes because the girlfriend, I guess, is wearing.
She's wearing denim cut-off shorts.
Right, and that becomes acceptable.
So the trans woman puts on the shorts.
Yes.
And the girlfriend puts on the long skirt.
And they're allowed to go in. Stop the insanity.
Yeah. Oh, and Busch Gardens apologized.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But the guard, I believe, unlike the coach, is still working there.
And I guess to finish, well, okay. Should we go to Madison, Wisconsin?
Oh, please, yes.
All right. So there was an internal memo there of the bishop trying to tell people how you're supposed to handle
Catholic bishop.
A Catholic bishop in Madison. What's his name? Anyway, how to handle it when you got a funeral of somebody who's got a gay spouse, and they basically tell people,
or a same-sex spouse.
Well, yes. Okay. All right.
There have been gay spouses in heterosexual marriages.
So the title of this memo is Consideration of Funeral Rights for a Person in a Homosexual, Civil, or Notorious Union, which would be the Teamsters under Jimmy Hoffa.
It's like the 19th century.
All right. So the surviving partner should not have any public or prominent role at a funeral rite. And if they put anything in the newspaper about what's going on, the name of the celebrating priest or parish should not be listed in any public obituary that also lists the surviving partner. This can't happen for obvious reasons, is what the memo says. So they said, oh, this is outrageous. This was just an internal thing we were telling our priests. Of course, most of your priests are gay. Some of them don't like it, and they leaked it.
So if a funeral of a gay person takes place and his or her same-sex spouse is not acknowledged at the funeral, the parishioners are supposed to just, and friends and family are supposed to just sit there in confusion that the spouse is not acknowledged.
I went to an AIDS funeral of a prominent gay district leader back in this is very early in the AIDS crisis, and this is in this Sephardic temple in Brooklyn, and they would not acknowledge. And I said, I'm not going to any more of these if this is the way it's going to be.
No, I've been to those.
You know, I mean, I'm not going. It's so, and the guy is sitting there bawling his eyes out. He's not even being recognized. I mean, you know, no. If you're going to do it that way, tell me in advance, because I ain't going.
And it's a real mystery why the family and friends and the spouse would want to hold a service under those conditions.
Right.
Whatever. Alternatively, Morgantown, West Virginia. The city council there has unanimously, in a rewriting overall of their human rights ordinance, added sexual orientation and gender identity and expression to the forbidden discrimination list. They are the 11th West Virginia city to do so. That's pretty impressive. And impressive work by Fairness West Virginia, which is the LGBT lobbying group there. They've been on the ground for many years, and they do great work.
And if you want to see how your city is doing, go to hrc.org. The Human Rights Campaign has put out its Municipal Equality Index rating, said 68 cities have earned perfect scores. Now, all right, they're going to tell you how they're doing on policy, but they don't really do a qualitative assessment of how you implementing these policies, anti-bullying, everything else.
They're basically taking a survey of who has what laws in place and guidelines. But I do want to give HRC credit, and I think this is an indication of their growing power and visibility in some corners. They're having their big annual dinner in D.C. this Saturday night. Kamala Harris, who is being mentioned prominently as a possible Democratic presidential candidate.
Senator from California.
Correct, is the keynote speaker. Hillary will be speaking. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, perhaps the most powerful man in the world at the moment.
Runs the world.
Is being honored. Billie Jean King. And Khizr Khan is showing up there.
The Gold Star father,
yes.
Who's got a book out and has been on television a lot. And, you know, he's one of the, he talked about on his interviews about being an early Ronald Reagan supporter in the old days.
Well, congratulations to HRC for being able to host all these people. It's an impressive lineup.
Yes. Now, let's get a LGBT federal rights bill passed.
That would be nice.
That's what the job is.
Well, first we have, you know, this.
And that's up to all of us.
Yes, and it's up to all of us in the midterm elections next year and all the elections that are coming up in the meantime. We have elections in a couple of weeks here of various governors, members of
Virginia,
Congress,
a lot
whatever.
of very, very important races in Virginia. Look, I don't want to get everybody's hopes up because remember, you know, they did the other side did a great job of redistricting. President Obama and Eric Holder are now making this their cause, trying to get fair districting in this country. If we could have that, we could have our country back. I mean, we'd still have a Senate, which is 2 people from Rhode Island and 2 people from California, but which is not Democratic, but we would have more hope of advancing.
Well, what makes my heart sink is when I hear Democrats and commentators say, oh, you know, this is going to be great to get rid of the Jeff Flakes and Bob Corkers because Bannon's going to put up these wackos and they have absolutely no chance of getting elected.
Like Donald Trump.
Yeah. Have you met our president? Really?
Well, I do think our side is much more energized now. And, you know, and we have been making progress in interim elections. Progress.
Footnote, a study from the City University of New York of 1,000 men. They are now coming out a year earlier than they did 10 years ago.
And what
Get
else?
to work.
And the Washington Blade is tired of not being called on at press conferences at the White House, and they wrote directly to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or exposed the fact that she's just ignoring us at this point.
While lying to them to say that she would call on them.
And then there's in Rochester, New York, the trigger warning queer and trans gun club.
I was going to ignore that.
Well, I mean, I think it's curious because they're not saying they're gun lovers. They're saying they're terrified of these militias and all these other people who have guns.
Well,
this is their solution.
That's what everybody who gets a gun says.
And we don't want to be seen as being weak.
I'm terrified of the black helicopters.
All right. And how about that Bill O'Reilly? We don't have to talk about it, but good grief. Oh, and I want to mention that two things. Marriage Equality USA has a new book out, and you can get it online for free. And you just go to marriageequality.org/book, and it's called The People's Victory, about the grassroots movement. And also there's going to be a memorial service for Kate Millett, the great lesbian feminist leader, November 9th from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Fourth Universalist Church up on Central Park West. I'll put that in the email at 76th Street there on November 9th. I'll be there.
Okay. International news. Well, we really should start with the most horrible news, which is that a popular Russian pop singer,
his name is
Zelimkhan Bakayev,
yes,
25 years old, went to a family wedding, I think, in Chechnya, and came up missing and is believed murdered by the cops in Chechnya for being gay. They trumped up a story about how he'd really gone somewhere else, but that proved to be a complete lie. And everyone
tortured to death.
Yeah.
And Grozny, just heartbreaking. It's a criminal nation. It's run like a crime syndicate at this point. Yeah. And then in Russia, the Russian authorities fined a woman almost $800 for posting LGBTI news stories on her Facebook page.
Yeah.
This is seen as a violation of the anti-propaganda, homosexual propaganda law.
It covers everything. And in Belarus, the cops raided 2 LGBT clubs and closed them. The patrons were harassed and detained. It's growing, and it's without any means of being stopped at the moment.
But in one of my ancestral lands in Bucharest, Romania, hundreds of people rallied for civil partnerships to be legally recognized as for unmarried cohabitants, expanding rights. Now, we still don't know if they're going to have a referendum on same-sex marriage there. It's being weighed by the legislature.
In Tanzania, 13 lawyers and activists were arrested at an HIV meeting. They were just having a simple meeting to talk about HIV, and they were arrested for promoting homosexuality.
And this was being run by a very prominent South African feminist lawyer, Sabonjali and Dashi. And she's absolutely shocked that this is that this was taking place, and makes it hard to move around in the world, doesn't it? We got trouble in Panama with the marriage case. There was one judge who wrote this decision saying, no, it's unconstitutional. But the other judges may weigh in and change that.
Yes, I'm optimistic about that.
Oh, good.
And while Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, is addressing the Heritage Foundation, Tony Abbott, the very right-wing former Prime Minister of Australia, is coming to the U.S. to address the Alliance Defending Freedom for the second time.
He's taking time off from the Australian campaign?
Well, it's almost over, and
it ends on November 7th.
75% have voted already, so maybe he feels
polls
he's
say
done his
3 in
job.
5 who have voted yes, but the yes side's not complacent. They keep saying, the polls can turn around. But the city of Sydney is anticipating a victory, and because then the legislature's going to have to, the Parliament's going to have to act, and they're not bound by this postal vote,
That's
even
true.
if we do win.
That's true.
But they're saying, if we win, for 100 days, if you want to use one of our big city facilities for your wedding, you can have it for free. And it's just for gay couples. So some people are squawking and say, I thought this was about equality. We have a lot of catching up to do if we're going to be equal.
That's exactly the spirit in which this is done. But first we have to actually pass the law. Meanwhile, across the Australia-New Zealand pond, The new Prime Minister of New Zealand, who's a young woman, Jacinda Ardern.
Ardern, yeah.
It turns out that she quit the Mormons in her youth.
Her youth, 2005.
Oh, she's only in her 30s now.
She's 37.
Over same-sex marriage.
Yes.
And she's sort of a minority party prime minister. The right-wing party got more votes, but they didn't get a majority.
That's right.
So she, in coalition with another progressive party, has taken power in New Zealand.
She also wants to liberalize the anti-abortion laws. They're quite strict over there. Yeah. They have life and health of the mother, but that's about it. And
in the Channel Islands off of Britain, the island of Alderney, which has a population of about 2,000, it's a British Crown dependency. Their legislature, which evidently consists of 10 people, has voted 9 yes, nobody no, 1 abstention for same-sex marriage rights. It needs the approval of the United Kingdom Privy Council. You would know more about what that is.
I mean, what does it need? Royal assent?
I guess so. But so do all these little island votes.
We need the Queen.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's a nice step.
And here's something from Egypt. I haven't delved deeply into it, but we know that they're rounding up people, gay people, using Grindr and other apps. So Grindr is trying to school their members how to avoid entrapment. And they're putting this on their website, on their site there, how to meet someone so that you can avoid becoming beaten and arrested and killed.
Look, this meetup apps, hookup apps problem is the real problem, and people are getting arrested and tortured using those in those places.
Okay.
And congratulations to British singer Sam Smith. Very popular with his song Stay With Me. There he is on the cover of, I guess, the weekend magazine of the Sunday Times, talking about his gender identity.
He says...
He came out as gay a couple of years ago.
He said, I don't know, I says, I feel just as much woman as I am man. And he says things like that there was a moment in his life where I didn't own a piece of male clothing. Really, I would wear full makeup every day in school, eyelashes, leggings with the Doc Martens, and huge fur coats for 2.5 years.
He says, I love a heel. I have tons of heels. And an alter ego, Caramel. But what I found interesting was he wasn't saying he was non-binary. He wasn't saying he was trans. He was saying he was both man and woman. And I thought that was a very interesting way of putting it.
Well, it's in the Bible. In Christ, there is neither male nor female.
I don't know that he's claiming that status.
It's in the Bible, and you give transgender people all this trouble. There's also neither Jew nor Greek. And I'm an atheist, and I know this. All right. I'll send you the link if you are on our email list, but there's a new documentary called Out North about Minnesota LGBTQ history, which was pretty interesting, and I'll put the link in our email. Okay, some theater reviews?
Yes.
All right. It's rare that I see a show where I really want to tremendously recommend it, and I'm sorry you can't see it anymore, but this kid is coming back. This is Thomas Ellenson, and he's a kid with cerebral palsy in a 1-hour play called It Is What It Is. There's Thomas with Seth Rudetsky, who's the great Sirius Radio theater guy and Broadway guy. It's about his life. I mean, and he can't talk. He cannot speak. So it's through a mechanical device that is, he whips around on the wheelchair all over the stage and tells you about his life. And it was, the show starts off, he comes out in this wheelchair and he's like this, and he's thrashing around, and you're like, oh, and you look, and he says, you're staring at me, aren't you? He says, I hope so. I'm the only one up here. And so it goes from there. It's very clever and warm, and he talks about his sexuality and wanting to be with people, and he says, even though I've seen, Kinky Boots all these times, I'm not gay, and even though Fun Home was my favorite show, I'm not a lesbian, and he talks about his love for girls. But I mean, it's just a wonderful show, and I hope it gets a new life elsewhere.
It is what it is.
Yes, and then I finally saw the revival of Torch Song Trilogy, which they're calling Torch Song. There's Michael Urie in the middle there as Arnold, and Mercedes Rule playing his mother. And I have to say, you know, I guess Harvey Fierstein is too much in my memory, and seeing this show.
Well, he wrote it. He originated the part of Arnold.
And it's written for him.
And this is a little truncated version.
Yeah. Oh, it's only 2.5 hours instead of 3.5 hours. Yeah. So, you know, I love Michael Urie. The show didn't work for me as well as it did under Harvey, and it's gotten some great reviews. But Mercedes Rule is absolutely fantastic,
Always
and she comes on
her.
in the second half and is wonderful. And I think they could have gotten someone younger to play the adopted son. That's all I'm going to say. He's a good actor, but a little younger. Okay, that would help.
Young and the Restless update. The two young women have admitted that they have an attraction for each other, that they did kiss, but one of them is saying, look, I have a career to pursue. I got to stay with my guy, who's your brother. It's a soap opera. So we'll see. I suspect there will be more to come between these two.
And Playboy magazine has its first transgender playmate, Ines Rao, 26, and they're making a big deal about this. There have been some protests from some former playmates who say you're ruining things, but they said we went through this when we had the first black playmate back in 1965, and they say it's the right thing to do. We're at a moment where gender roles are evolving. So there is Ines as a playmate.
And you may want to check out a movie that's opening next week on November 3rd in New York and Chicago, and LA on December 1st, and will be available on video on demand. Princess Cyd, CYD. It's a young lesbian love story set in Chicago one summer. It's playing here in New York at the Museum of the Moving Image. It looks, I've only seen the trailer, it looks cute and nice. But the movie I did see at New Fest, the LGBT festival in New York, is Hot to Trot, which won the Audience Award for Best Documentary. Let's take a look at the trailer as we bring in the producer-director.
All the way from Yonkers, New York, Ernesto Palmer dancing with Nikolai Shvakov. Your U.S. champion, Emily and Kieran from San Francisco. April Folly same-sex dance sport competition. Our evening extravaganza begins right now with a showcase of champions.
Dancing is going to be one of the last bastions of homophobia to fall because it is a vertical expression of a horizontal desire.
Don't pull. You're not leading. You're not leading. Who you leading? Yes.
He's Russian and I'm Latino. Culture-wise, he's really dominant, and I'm more passive.
I didn't ever had a childhood that I would say like someone inspired me to be something. You know, it makes me feel like, oh, I accomplished this, even though I don't have all these other things that other people do have.
To my parents, I finally came out about like when I was 30. I was married, you know. I tried to do, you know, the right thing, you know.
So much to her surprise, we are joined by Gail Friedman, producer-director of Hot to Trot, which won the Audience Award for Best Documentary at New Fest.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Gail is an old colleague of mine from the CBS Morning News. She went on to produce at 60 Minutes and other major productions all over. And you produced a film on the making of the World Trade Center Memorial.
Correct.
And then had nothing to do and tell the story.
And I learned about this fascinating but not very well known world of same-sex competitive ballroom dance. Decided that there was this intoxicating blend of art and politics, and that I was going to tell that story. And so I wrote to you.
You did?
I did, and said, remember me?
Absolutely. But I was just a cheerleader through this, and because I knew that you were a terrific producer and that this was a terrific story. And in fact, you have put it on film in a way that surpassed my expectations and that really captured the audience. I was there on Sunday when it screened, and they rose and cheered. They were really carried away by it.
It was pretty overwhelming, I have to say, because, I mean, you know, it was a 5-year journey from this idea to actually making it into a finished product. And we followed our characters for 4 years on and off the dance floor. And their backstories are really, for me, the heart and soul of the film, because as I said on Sunday in introducing the film, they're living the issues rather than working the issues. And so in a way that I couldn't entirely have envisioned when the film began, it just evolved and got sort of deeper and richer, and it was a thrill to share it with that. It was a great response, I have to say. It really was.
How widespread is this phenomenon?
Worldwide.
Okay.
It's part of the gay games.
And why,
Yes.
what is the story? Or I know there's not one story. Well, why do people want to do this?
Well, for one thing, in the mainstream dance world, same-sex dance couples are prohibited. In fact, yeah, isn't that insane in 2017? I mean, as one of my characters says in the film, the rules explicitly say that it's a man and a woman, and they don't even really bother saying male leader and female follower because they just assume that that's what it would be.
Well, they have a lot of out contestants now on Dancing with the Stars, but they're always paired up with an opposite sex couple,
Yes.
a partner, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, I think we may help shake that up, actually.
That would be nice.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Now, what the audience really responded to on Sunday was the fact that so many of the characters in your film are immigrants.
That is absolutely true. And it wasn't as if we set out to make a statement about immigration per se, but it was one of those amazing things that, I mean, you asked how widespread is it? It's worldwide, and in fact, same-sex dancing in some ways is probably even more popular in Europe than in America, although I think it's becoming more so here too. But it so happened that more than half of our lead characters are originally from other countries. And
give them the list.
Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, New Zealand, Hungary,
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. We have one. This is telling a story, but there was a broadcaster who at one point thought they might be interested in this in this film. Excuse me, and she looked at the trailer and she said, "Aren't there any just plain Americans in this?"
Proving once again how really disgusting we are as a country.
But that became a message that was intentional and quite marvelous, really.
How is the dancing any different? I remember we had the choreographer Matthew Bourne on here, and he wanted to do Romeo and Julius or something, where you'd have a male.
Right.
And he said he thought it was challenging to try to choreograph that. So what does it differ, or do you have somebody always leads and follows, or how does it work?
Well, as the dancers will tell you, there's not like a male role and a female role. It's lead and follow. And what they do within same-sex dance is, excuse me, sometimes one person leads and one person follows because they prefer it. But a lot of times they switch it up.
Two-man switch. We used to have that debate.
Within a dance. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's hard physically, it's hard emotionally. It's a very different mindset to leading and following. And to do that within a dance, you have to really have worked out your choreography and your issues.
I took ballroom dancing in the 4th grade at the golf club.
Oh,
we
so
all had to do it.
So did I.
With white gloves. The only
I still have my elbow-length white kid gloves from my first coming out as a debutante in Boston. I know, it's disgusting.
We could go, so we could get into this.
No, we couldn't. No,
That's next week's show.
It's too hard.
No.
It's hard.
Now, would you like to waltz off the set?
No, thank you. Foxtrot's more my speed. But let me ask you the question that I think you should have been asked and haven't been asked a lot around the festival circuit, which is how does a straight woman decide to do this subject, and how does that work out? I mean, I never had any questions about you doing it, but you are straight and you are doing this, suddenly you're plunged into the gay world and same-sex ballroom dancing.
As for what I mean, you know, I think what drew me to initially was that it was gorgeous, it was joyful, it was unexpected. I think that LGBTQ issues are the civil rights issue of our time, and I just loved it. And why I got as obsessed with it as I did, I don't actually have a terrific answer for, except that I just knew that I thought it was pretty universal. I mean, these characters each have a backstory that's resonant no matter who you are. I mean, issues of poverty and issues of addiction and health crises and relationship issues and parental conflicts. And it takes place within this world. It could have been a different world, and I think the film would have held up, but the fact that it was within this, what I found just an incredibly fascinating subculture that people haven't explored very much in the mainstream media, just clicked for me. As for how I was welcomed in immediately, and that's something that I'm eternally grateful for, because it was a privilege to tell their stories. And I can't say that I ever once, I mean, I'm sure I had to prove myself, but I never once felt anything but openness and affection. I mean, it grew over the years because we all became good friends because I was always around, being a complete pain in the butt.
Well, you have to be when you're making a documentary on a shoestring, I might add.
Oh, yes.
Well, quick question.
Yeah.
So are they all gay and lesbian couples, or are they just same-sex couples who are doing this?
Our lead characters are all gay and lesbians, but in point of fact, not everybody who does same-sex dance is. That's actually a really good question. There are straight people who do same-sex dancing. There was a woman actually here in New York who originally I thought might be in the film, and she's married to a man. They were both dancers and actually ran a studio in their loft in New York, and it was very hard to make a living that way, so they went off and found other careers, but she still likes to dance and she likes to lead. So she competes. She's very active in the whole same-sex dance scene.
And how many of them are couples in real life?
Oh, you mean romantic couples?
Also, that's another question.
Some, not a lot. I mean, there's some, and some of that evolves in the film, actually.
Yes, you see both.
Yeah, exactly. You see both, and you see how it influences the relationships. It's hard, right?
Now, we're down to our last few seconds. So people can see this now in London at the Fringe Film Festival.
At the Fringe Film Festival on Sunday, November 19th at 2:30 in the afternoon.
And beyond that?
And beyond that, we are waiting to hear from a multiplicity of other festivals. HotToTrotFilm.com.
HotToTrotFilm.com.
We will send you notes about future venues, many to come.
And we will put it in our email.
And I really congratulate you on producing something that is so popular because it is a unique look at the community. It's not the predictable venues that we see so often. So thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to WYBE in Philadelphia, our home for many years, and we will see all of you next week.
Get on our email list and you'll find out. Well, you never know.
If you wander in, you're likely to end up on the air.